The day Chuck Norris changed karate forever. You know, there are fights that aren't just fights. They're turning points, moments when everything shifts. And in 1967, under the blazing lights of Madison Square Garden, karate in America was about to lose its innocence. On one side stood Joe Louis, the powerhouse. A former Marine, 195 pounds of muscle and aggression, undefeated, untouchable. On the other, Chuck Norris, calm, precise, methodical, but obsessed. Obsessed with studying, anticipating, and dismantling anyone who stood in his way. This wasn't supposed to be a war. It was supposed to be a showcase. And yet, that night, it became something else entirely. Because through these two men, the future of karate in the West was about to be rewritten. America's karate boom. It's the 1960s. America's just coming out of the war. Soldiers are returning home from bases in Japan and Korea, bringing with them a strange, exotic martial art called karate. But forget the slow meditations and graceful forms. Americans didn't want philosophy, they wanted fighting. And so, tournaments exploded, hundreds of competitors, crowds screaming, real hits, real sweat, real risk. Karate wasn't just a discipline anymore, it was becoming a blood sport. At the center of it all stood one man, Joe Louis. Joe Louis. The American Beast. Joe Louis was built like a boxer, but moved like a cat. Trained in Okinawa, he brought back technique. But what made him dangerous was his mindset. He didn't want ceremony. He wanted to test, to see what actually worked when someone was trying to hit you back. And it worked. Louis destroyed everyone. His attacks were explosive, direct, overwhelming. He was fast, aggressive, and confident. He didn't just win fights. He defined the sport. For the first time, Americans saw karate as something raw, fast, and powerful. He had swagger. He called his shots. He predicted victories on camera. And most of the time, he was right. To the crowd, Joe Louis wasn't just a fighter. He was the embodiment of strength. In his mind, the formula was simple. If you hit harder, you win. But somewhere on the other side of the country, a quieter fighter was preparing to shatter that belief. Chuck Norris, the silent technician. While Joe Louis dominated the headlines, Chuck Norris was quietly building something dangerous. During his Air Force service in South Korea, he discovered Tang Soo Do, and it consumed him. He trained endlessly. Every strike, every pivot, every breath, repeated thousands of times. He wasn't focused on power, he was focused on timing, that invisible fraction of a second between an attack and a counter. The moment when patience turns into precision. By the mid-60s, Norris was winning. Regional tournaments, state titles. But no one paid much attention. He wasn't loud, he wasn't cocky. He just showed up, fought clean, and left with the trophy. To Joe Louis, he was an afterthought. To Chuck Norris, Louis was the final test. He had studied him. He knew the patterns, the openings, the flaws behind the power. He knew the day would come when he'd face the monster. And he was ready. Madison Square Garden, 1967. The stage is set. June 24, 1967. Madison Square Garden, the All-American Karate Championship, hosted by Grandmaster S. Henry Cho. Hundreds of fighters, thousands of spectators. For the first time, karate had made it to the biggest arena in America. But everyone in the crowd knew the real story. This wasn't about the tournament. It was about one fight. Joe Louis versus Chuck Norris. Power versus precision. Rage versus control. The king versus the quiet challenger. Nobody could have known it yet. But when that bell rang, this wasn't just a contest. It was a revolution. The air inside Madison Square Garden was electric. Hundreds of fighters had already gone through the mats that day, but everyone knew the real storm was still coming. When Joe Louis and Chuck Norris stepped onto the floor, the crowd went silent. It wasn't respect. It was anticipation, the sense that something historic was about to happen. Two men bowed, two legends began to move, and from the very first second, it was war. The opening clash. Lewis came out exactly as expected, fast, explosive, and terrifying. He didn't test distance. He attacked like a freight train. Each blitz was a burst of muscle and aggression, trying to break Norris's rhythm before it even started. But Norris didn't flinch. He didn't run. He sidestepped, pivoted just enough, and unleashed a clean ridge hand strike straight to Lewis's chest. First point, Norris. The crowd gasped. They had just seen the unthinkable. The king had been touched, not with brute force, but with timing. That single moment set the tone. Norris wasn't afraid. He was reading him, like a scientist watching a pattern unfold. Every rush, every feint, every punch Lewis threw. Norris was already there, a split second ahead. The war of nerves. By the second exchange, the fight had turned psychological. Lewis was pressing forward, his eyes locked, his breathing heavy. He wasn't used to chasing. Norris kept moving, not backward but sideways, using angles, creating space, controlling the rhythm. Every time Lewis attacked, Norris slipped just out of reach and countered in perfect timing. A back fist, a quick kick, a body strike that landed clean and sharp. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risk, just precision. But the more Lewis missed, the harder he hit. His power was monstrous. Every punch sounded like a gunshot echoing through the garden. He landed a few hard body shots, enough to shake Norris, enough to remind everyone that one clean hit could end it all. Still, Norris didn't break. He smiled, just slightly, as if to say, "I see you." The turning point. Halfway through the fight, you could feel the tide turning. Lewis was frustrated. He started lunging, trying to end it with pure aggression. And that's when Norris capitalized. As Lewis charged in, Norris pivoted inside the attack, and boom! A lightning-fast punch landed squarely before Lewis could reset his guard. Lewis stumbled. The crowd exploded. Every technique Norris threw was clean, controlled, and perfectly measured. He wasn't fighting against Joe Lewis's power, he was using it against him. Like a master chess player, he was turning each attack into an opening. This wasn't luck. This was hundreds of hours of studying one man's habits, one man's rhythm, and dismantling it piece by piece. The final exchange. Then came the last moment. Brutal, beautiful, unforgettable. Lewis, desperate to close the gap, launched a final blitz. He lunged forward, aiming to overpower Norris once and for all. But Norris had seen that charge 100 times in training. He stepped inside, parried the strike, and delivered a perfect counterpunch, followed instantly by a controlled hook kick, stopping just short of full contact, but landing cleanly enough to seal the score. The bell rang. Silence. Then, an eruption. The announcer's voice cut through the chaos. "Winner, Chuck Norris." The crowd went wild. Some were in shock. Others were cheering like they'd just witnessed a myth collapse. Joe Lewis, the undefeated powerhouse, the golden boy of American karate, had just been beaten, not by a stronger man, not by a faster man, but by a smarter one. The meaning behind the violence. It wasn't a wild brawl, it was controlled savagery, a masterclass in focus under fire. Both men gave everything. Lewis fought with heart, Norris with precision. Each absorbed hits that would have broken lesser fighters. Each refused to give an inch. But in the end, it wasn't the most powerful who triumphed. It was the one who could think faster than he could feel. That day, karate itself changed shape. The myth of pure power fell, and a new truth was born. Timing beats strength. Strategy beats aggression. The moment the bell rang, the world of karate split in two, before and after. Chuck Norris had just done the impossible. He didn't just beat Joe Lewis, he dismantled an idea, the idea that power alone ruled the ring. That single moment sent a shockwave through the martial arts world. And overnight, everything changed. The fall of a king. For years, Joe Louis had been the definition of dominance. His name was synonymous with victory. And now, in front of thousands, he'd been outscored, out-timed, and outthought. But Joe Louis wasn't the kind of man to disappear. He took that loss personally, not as humiliation, but as a challenge. Instead of retreating, he evolved. Louis began questioning the rules, the system, the very structure of point fighting. He saw the limits, that clean, controlled strikes didn't represent the chaos of a real fight. And from that realization, he would go on to create something new, full-contact karate, the bridge that would later become American kickboxing. So even in defeat, Joe Louis became a pioneer. He shifted from champion to innovator, and in doing so, he carried the sport forward. The rise of a new icon. As for Chuck Norris, his victory at Madison Square Garden catapulted him into legend. The quiet technician was suddenly the face of American karate. His discipline, his precision, his calm, it resonated deeply, not just with fighters, but with ordinary people. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't arrogant, he was focused, and that made him relatable. Almost instantly, Norris's name became a symbol of a new kind of strength, the thinking fighter. His schools multiplied across California. He taught soldiers, kids, and celebrities, including one student who would change his life forever, Steve McQueen. McQueen, already one of Hollywood's biggest stars, told him, "Chuck, you've got something real. You should be in the movies." That advice planted a seed that would grow into one of the most iconic martial arts careers in film history. But at the time, Norris wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing perfection. The dojo revolution. Meanwhile, across America, dojos were transforming. What had once been rigid, traditional, and slow was now fast, dynamic, and tactical. Instructors began teaching footwork, timing, and adaptability, all lessons drawn from Norris's fight. Suddenly, sparring wasn't just about aggression, it became about strategy. Fighters studied opponents, analyzed their rhythms, planned counters in advance. Karate had gone from muscle to mind. Tournaments adapted too. Judges began rewarding precision and control. Competitors stopped charging blindly. They started thinking. Every dojo wanted its students to fight like Norris. And that shift didn't just change how people trained, it changed how they thought about martial arts itself. The psychological shockwave. For many fighters, Joe Louis had seemed untouchable, the symbol of pure dominance. When he fell, something clicked. They realized that being unbeatable wasn't about size or strength. It was about understanding. That realization inspired a new generation. Young martial artists across the U.S. started believing they could win, not because they were stronger, but because they were smarter. They trained with purpose, studied with precision, and fought with patience. What Norris proved that night was simple, but revolutionary. Victory belongs not to the most aggressive, but to the most aware. And awareness of timing, distance, and self became the new holy grail of American karate. The friendship that followed. Years later, something remarkable happened. Despite their rivalry, Norris and Louis grew close. They trained together. They shared ideas, sparred again and again, not as enemies, but as brothers in arms. In interviews, Norris would later say, "Joe was the most powerful fighter I ever faced. Without him, I wouldn't have become who I am." And Louis, years before his death in 2012, returned the respect. "Chuck taught me control. I taught him aggression. Together, we built American karate." Two warriors, once divided by rivalry, now united by legacy. The 1967 showdown between Chuck Norris and Joe Louis wasn't just a clash of two men. It was a collision of two worlds, tradition and transformation. And from that collision, a new era of martial arts was born. More than half a century later, the echoes of that fight still resonate, not just in dojos, but in every fighter who believes that discipline can outlast brute force. 1. A tactical revolution. Before that night, karate in America was simple. Whoever hit harder, faster, won. Joe Louis was the embodiment of that philosophy, a juggernaut powered by pure physicality. But when Chuck Norris beat him, the myth cracked. Norris introduced something America hadn't yet seen in competition: strategic fighting, an approach rooted in timing, anticipation, and mental control. He didn't fight Joe Louis, he decoded him. From that moment on, dojos across the U.S. began to evolve. Coaches started training students not just to punch, but to think. Footwork, spacing, rhythm, and reading the opponent became the new fundamentals. Karate was no longer a test of muscle, it was a test of mind. This was the first wave of what would later shape modern combat sports, the idea that intelligence wins fights. 2. The birth of modern sparring. After Madison Square Garden, every serious martial artist began to rethink sparring. They stopped charging blindly. They began studying tape, analyzing reactions, training to exploit milliseconds of opportunity. Every fighter became a strategist. This shift didn't just elevate the level of competition, it professionalized it. Fighters became tacticians. Tournaments became laboratories of movement. And karate became something more than tradition. It became a science of controlled violence. Even today, when you see a modern karate or taekwondo athlete feint, pivot, and score from an unexpected angle, you're seeing the evolution that began that night in 1967. 3. Karate goes mainstream. That fight also did something no one expected. It made karate a spectator sport. Until then, martial arts had lived in small halls and military bases. But the Norris-Louis duel happened under the brightest lights in America, Madison Square Garden, and the images of that match spread fast. Suddenly, people wanted to watch, to learn, to join. Schools filled up, magazines sold out. For the first time, karate wasn't just an Eastern import, it was an American phenomenon. The 1970s would become the golden age of martial arts in the West, and at the heart of it all stood the man who'd proven that intelligence could beat power, Chuck Norris. 4. The making of a legend. After 1967, Chuck Norris didn't just win titles. He built an empire. He opened schools across the country, taught Hollywood actors, and refined his message: discipline, humility, control. Through Steve McQueen, he entered the world of film. And from there, he became an icon, not just of martial arts, but of the American spirit itself. But behind the fame, Norris never forgot what truly mattered. To him, that fight with Joe Louis wasn't about glory. It was about respect, the respect earned through mastery. In countless interviews, Norris has said that what he learned that night wasn't how to win, but how to evolve. That's what separates champions from legends. 5. 2 warriors, 1 legacy. Joe Louis and Chuck Norris would remain connected for the rest of their lives, teacher and student, rivals and brothers. They sparred together, taught together, and shaped the next generation side by side. Louis, ever the innovator, would go on to develop the first systems of American kickboxing. Norris, ever the tactician, would bring the spirit of karate to global audiences through his films. Together, they did something no one else had done. They Americanized martial arts, not by diluting it, but by fusing Eastern discipline with Western realism. Their fight wasn't just a contest, it was a conversation between strength and precision, aggression and awareness, tradition and change. And from that conversation came everything that defines martial arts today. 6. The lesson that endures. If you strip away the fame, the trophies, and the myths, what remains from that night is one timeless truth. Power may start a fight, but awareness finishes it. Because fighting, real fighting, isn't about destruction. It's about understanding yourself under pressure. It's about reading, adapting, and acting with clarity when chaos takes over. That's what Chuck Norris did. That's what Joe Louis learned. And that's what karate became. A mirror that reflects not how strong you are, but how present you are in the moment. The final reflection. Over 50 years later, their battle still teaches us something profound. That evolution doesn't come from dominance, it comes from challenge. That respect between rivals can shape an entire culture, and that one moment of mastery can echo for generations. So the next time you step into a dojo, remember, every stance, every strike, every breath you take carries a piece of that history. The night when Chuck Norris faced Joe Louis and changed karate forever. Do you believe one fight can transform an entire art? What other battles, in or out of the ring, do you think reshaped the world? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want to keep exploring the timeless moments that forged the icons of combat, subscribe, because this is Timeless Icon.